In front of them stood a group of furious fanatics, traitors to their country. They were not only mocked and insulted but even threatened at gunpoint and forced to strip naked. The men had to expose their buttocks, and the women were made to bare their chests. Among them, a beautiful woman received special treatment, humiliated while naked, subjected to pain and punishment, and drenched in the foul stench of excrement falling from above. Her name was Rachel Stein. In 1944, as a Jew fleeing the Nazis, Rachel escaped to the Netherlands and took refuge on a farm. She thought she could avoid the horrors of war, but she had underestimated the Nazis' determination to exterminate Jews. That day, just as she and her boyfriend were about to board a boat for a peaceful getaway, a German bomber suddenly appeared in the sky. Even after being hit and losing 2 engines to friendly fire, the bomber refused to stop dropping bombs. Rachel's hiding place, the farm, was reduced to rubble. She and her boyfriend, lucky to survive, quickly packed up that night. Then suddenly, someone knocked at the door. He knew Rachel must be hiding inside, because after the bombing, the Nazis searched the house and found no bodies. The man wasn't German, he was Dutch, and his name was Van. He said he had obtained a list of Jewish names from the Dutch police and had joined a civilian resistance group against the Nazis. He came to warn Rachel the Germans would return soon for another sweep, and she needed to hide again. As he turned to leave, Rachel chased after him. She stopped him and asked if he could help her escape. Van hesitated. It was a deadly risk, but in the end, he agreed to help Rachel. He also reminded them not to bring too much luggage, only valuables. The next day, Rachel went to find Small, an old friend of her father's. They had made a promise long ago if Rachel ever got into trouble, Small would help her unconditionally. Rachel pulled out 2 photos hidden inside her necklace, which matched the one Small had. It proved her identity. Small opened his safe and handed Rachel a bundle of US dollars and a bag of diamonds. The next day, Van drove a truckload of people to a German checkpoint. During inspection, he said the passengers were Jews being delivered to a concentration camp. The guards found no issue and waved them through. Van drove them to a remote area. Once off the truck, Rachel saw her younger brother and others, all Jews like her. They had also asked Van to help them escape the Netherlands. Van seemed like a saint. He didn't charge a single cent and was helping out of pure goodwill. He put them all on a small boat but didn't board himself. He said he still had more Jews to rescue. Everyone on that boat had one thing in common: they were all rich or influential, but in their desperation to escape, none of them noticed this detail. That night, the cheerful Rachel was still chatting with others about the happy life they'd have in their next country. Suddenly, a beam of light lit up the boat. The Germans had been waiting all along, and without a word, they opened fire and slaughtered everyone. Rachel didn't stop to check on her boyfriend. She dove straight into the water. The German soldiers kept shooting until their ammo ran out, and only then did the squad leader emerge from the cabin. Rachel, miraculously alive, swam quietly to shore. From a distance, she saw the Germans looting the bodies. Every Jew had gold and dollars hidden on them. The German commander was very pleased. This was clearly his get-rich scheme. Rachel, still in the water, memorized his face. One day, she would make him pay. 5 months later, Rachel found a job in town. Her employer, Gerben, turned out to be the leader of the local resistance group. After learning what Rachel had been through, he invited her to join the group. With her family and boyfriend all dead, Rachel didn't hesitate for a second. She joined the underground resistance against the Germans. Within the group, Hans and Rachel posed as husband and wife to gather intelligence, while others handled logistics. Rachel was the only Jew in the group, and she had changed her name to Ellis. Soon, they received a mission. In an open field, using light signals, they guided a transport plane to drop supplies. The metal barrels contained weapons and some chocolate. In wartime, chocolate was a luxury. Once everything was confirmed, Hans told everyone to quickly load the supplies into the truck. Just as Hans was about to enter the warehouse, a German armored vehicle suddenly burst in. The surprise attack caught everyone off guard. Seeing that they offered no resistance, the German soldiers moved in to capture them alive. But Hans took the opportunity to fight back. With the help of his teammates, they managed to kill all the German soldiers without any casualties. The next day, Ellis and Hans took a train to the city. During the ride, they were stopped by German soldiers for an identity check. They tried to use flirtation to get by, but the soldiers insisted on inspecting their suitcases. To avoid suspicion, Ellis slapped Hans, pretending they were arguing. Then she picked up the 2 weapon-filled cases and left the compartment. While looking for a new spot, she stumbled upon a VIP cabin with a German officer inside. Fluent in German, Ellis confidently opened the door. The officer, a polite and refined man, helped her lift the suitcase. Ellis's looks didn't hurt either. The officer's name was Munsa, and he had a hobby collecting stamps. Every time he invaded a country, he collected its stamps. This gave Ellis an opening, and she quickly struck up a conversation with Munsa.
Controller.
Was ist denn? Sehen Sie nicht, dass ich beschäftigt bin? Erkennen Sie weiter.
Jawohl.
Darf ich mal sehen? Ich bin noch ganz vorsichtig.
As they chatted, Ellis noticed Munsa had only one Dutch stamp. His collection was mostly incomplete. Soon the train arrived at its destination, and Munsa got off with Ellis. He offered to walk her home, but she politely declined. Playing hard to get was still a useful tactic, but things soon took a turn. Just as the truck carrying weapons arrived at its destination, some children fell onto the road. The driver swerved to avoid them and crashed into a warehouse. Nearby German soldiers noticed the fallen weapons and saw even more inside the truck. One blew a whistle to raise the alarm. The 3 people in the truck immediately fled, but they were surrounded on all sides. With no chance to resist, they were beaten and captured. One of them was Gerben's son. Rushing out now would have been suicide. After calming down, Gerben said they wouldn't be executed right away, which meant there was still hope. All their hopes now rested on Ellis. She had contact with German officer Munsa. If she could infiltrate their ranks, there might be a chance to rescue them. Everyone present knew what that might cost.
U bedoelt met hem naar bed?
Nou, dat is wel een beetje grof gezegd.
Ik hou van duidelijk. Bedoelt u dat?
Hoe ver zou je gaan? Voor Tim en de anderen.
Zover als die Münze zelf wil.
The next day, Ellis went alone to the German administrative building. While waiting in the lobby, she saw her captured comrades. When she turned around, Munsa was already standing behind her. Ellis had come prepared. She brought him the full collection of Dutch stamps. Appealing to his interests was the best way to get close to him. As Munsa admired the stamps, Ellis noticed chocolate on the table. It looked exactly like the chocolate that had been airdropped to them before. Still, she didn't think too much about it. Munsa knew she wasn't just there to be nice, but the gift touched him, so he invited her to a banquet. After a speech from a senior officer, everyone started singing together. Ellis saw the German officer playing piano. It was the same face she'd seen in the water years ago. When Munsa approached, Ellis forced herself to stay calm and took another sip of wine to steady her nerves. Then she returned to the hall and sang for the German officers. Ellis had never received any spy training. The only thing allowing her to stand tall in front of the evil Franken was her immense hatred and unwavering determination. After a few drinks, Ellis saw the moment was right and began to flirt with Munsa. The two ended up in the bedroom, just as she had planned. After their time together, Ellis saw photos of Munsa's family, but they were long gone, killed in an explosion during the war. Ellis could deeply relate to the feeling of losing everything. Munsa, too, seemed to recognize something in her eyes. After this intimate encounter, Ellis was allowed to work inside the German office. While working, she saw a colleague removing many pieces of jewelry. One look and Ellis knew those were stolen from Jews. The colleague casually mentioned that the rest of the jewelry was stored in Franken's safe. Ellis didn't react outwardly. She simply returned to her desk. But when she saw the execution list, she froze. It was full of names from the resistance. Their rescue was now a top priority. Just then, Ellis ran into Small, the man who once gave her money. He, too, was part of the underground resistance. This time, he came for 2 reasons: to negotiate a ceasefire with Munsa, and to deliver a bugging device. Since Ellis had already infiltrated the office, she was the perfect person to install it. She took the bug and went to the lobby, looking for a place to plant it. Small finished the peace talks. The agreement was in place.
Das ist der Hinrichtungsbefehl für die 3 Terroristen. Morgen früh knallen wir sie ab. Unterschreiben Sie das mal eben.
Das kommt überhaupt nicht in Frage. Hier wird niemand abgeknallt.
Sie haben gestanden, auf frischer Tat ertappt. Die müssen an die Wand. Führerbefehl, das wissen Sie genauso gut wie ich.
Aber hier gebe ich die Befehle. Und wenn ich sage, sie werden nicht hingerichtet, dann werden sie nicht hingerichtet.
Munsa, unlike many other German officers, wasn't bloodthirsty. He had lost his family in the war, and in his heart, he hated the killing. Taking advantage of the moment, Ellis slipped into his office. She removed the painting on the wall and prepared to hide the bug behind it.
Alice?
Ich komme gleich.
Was machst du denn hier?
Seeing that Munsa still suspected nothing, Ellis made up an excuse to leave and immediately returned to the resistance. After testing, the bug worked perfectly. Every word from the other side was heard loud and clear. During surveillance, Ellis heard a name: Van, the same Dutchman who had once helped her escape. It turned out he was a traitor, secretly working with the Nazis to collect the names of wealthy Jews, luring them with false promises of escape. Then he would have them killed and steal their money. Ellis hated Van with every fiber of her being. She suggested they find a chance to eliminate him, but Gerben disagreed. He feared that if Van died, the Germans would lose their moneymaker and, in a fit of rage, kill all the hostages. Among those hostages was Gerben's son, and he wasn't willing to risk that. To him, the Nazis were targeting Jews, but those now imprisoned were members of the Dutch resistance. This disagreement created a rift between him and Ellis. Small quickly stepped in and said he had reached an agreement with Munza. As long as the resistance didn't kill any Germans, there would be no retaliation against the Dutch. For the sake of the long-term strategy, they had to remain still, but Ellis couldn't accept that and walked away from the conversation with Gerben. As she prepared to return to Munza, Hans caught up to her and quietly suggested they capture Van alive. This way, they could extract more intel, and to fool the Nazis, they would make it look like Van had fled with stolen money. Driven by vengeance, Ellis agreed. The next day, she and Hans waited near the German building until Van emerged. Without hesitation, they got out of the car and followed him onto an empty street. Their teammate's car passed Van and stopped in front of him. Out of bullets, Van gritted his teeth and made a run for it. When Hans caught up, Van struck him twice, knocking him to the ground. Ellis rushed in to help, but she couldn't overpower him. Luckily, a teammate fired a shot and killed Van, but that also meant they lost the chance to interrogate him. A vital lead had been wasted. Seeing Van's body fall, Hans and Ellis had no choice but to retreat quickly. That night, back at the base, Gerben furiously scolded them. Ellis may have saved a group of Jews by killing Van, but the consequence was that the Nazis decided to execute all the remaining hostages. As chaos loomed, Small pulled out a blueprint of the German security office, suggesting an inside-out prison break. With a plan in place, Ellis returned to Munza that evening. She thought she had everything under control, but she had underestimated her opponent. A beautiful brunette suddenly dyes her hair blonde, throws herself into his arms, and days later Van ends up dead? Even a fool could figure out she was Jewish. At this point, Ellis stopped pretending. She gambled on Munza's humanity, believing he was different from the other German officers. The next day, Ellis showed up at the office as usual. Shortly after, Munza entered with a general to inspect Franken's safe, following a tip that he was hoarding Jewish treasure. This was Ellis's leverage on her first day. A colleague had told her Franken's safe was full of jewelry. She had shared everything with Munza the day before, but to their shock, Franken had already moved the contents. The safe held only documents and a bottle of red wine.
Entschuldigung, Frau.
Obergruppenführer, Münze verhandelt mit Terroristen. Hat ihnen versprochen, keine Vergeltungsmaßnahmen zu ergreifen. Auch nicht für den Mord an Van Rijn.
Sie verhandeln?
Der Iraker Widerstand ist bereit, sämtliche Anschläge einzustellen und seine Waffen abzuliefern. Wenn wir auf Vergeltungsmaßnahmen verzichten.
Das steht in komplettem Widerspruch zum Niedermachungsbefehl des Führers. Erlassen am 4. September für die Dauer des Ausnahmezustands. Der ist nach wie vor in Kraft!
Wozu denn noch mehr Blut vergießen, Obergruppenführer?
To the general, Munza's preference for peace made him look like a defeatist. That was unacceptable. Unsurprisingly, Munza was stripped of his rank and declared a war criminal. He was immediately sentenced to death for treason. Meanwhile, the resistance had tailors prepare German uniforms and forged entry permits. Inside the compound, Ellis was applying makeup, preparing for the party. After a soldier called away her colleague, Ellis snuck downstairs. Seeing no guards, she grabbed a steel bar and climbed through the coal chute, prying open the lock. Afterward, she calmly returned to the ballroom. Hans and his team arrived at the gate in a truck, disguised as Germans and prisoners. They were granted access. Through the entrance Ellis had opened, everyone slipped in. Soon, they unlocked the rear gate of the prison. Finding no guards inside, their captured comrades were mostly unharmed, just lightly injured. As they rescued them, Hans inexplicably smiled at one of the cell doors. Upstairs, Ellis fought back nausea as she danced with Franken. Seeing how clueless everyone was, she felt it had all been worth it. Hans had promised her that Munza would be rescued too, but German troops had already set an ambush. Though the resistance fought back, the Germans had greater firepower and reinforcements. Half the team was soon dead or wounded. Hans fought and retreated, realizing the rescue had failed. Now, all they could do was save whoever was still alive. When he reached the gate, The last teammate had just died. Without hesitating, Hans fled with the only surviving driver. Back home, Gerben saw the two of them return, but only the two of them. His son and everyone else were dead. It was obvious someone had leaked the plan. As Gerben grieved, the bug suddenly transmitted audio.
Du hast hervorragende Arbeit geleistet.
Das ist doch selbstverständlich. Für den Führer tut man, was man kann.
Die Kohlenluke. Wie die Ratten in die Falle gelaufen. Alice, willst du auch noch etwas sagen?
Ze lacht nog ook. Het teringwijf, dat lacht nog ook.
The level of deception was impressive. The remaining resistance members channeled all their anger toward Ellis. Gerben, who had lost his son, swore he would kill her by any means necessary, with no more use for her. Franken threw Ellis into prison, awaiting execution alongside Munza. Fortunately, Munza had allies. One of them ambushed a guard and took the keys. Munza and Ellis escaped. They hid in the backseat of a car driven by a German squad leader. Getting out of the compound was easy. Now fugitives. They took shelter in a tent by the river, without official identities. Life was oddly peaceful. Ellis had long fallen in love with Munza's kindness. Time passed. Germany surrendered, and the Netherlands was liberated. Franken, unwilling to surrender his looted treasure, tried to escape by boat. He thought he was heading for a luxurious post-war life, but the boat didn't get far before it stalled at sea. His scout went down to investigate and never came back. With no choice, Franken armed himself and entered the engine room. Hans was already waiting for him. Back on land, the Netherlands celebrated its freedom. Ellis and Munza quietly visited Small's home. After the failed operation, they suspected a mole within the group, and Small had provided the prison blueprints. They suspected he had betrayed them. Small didn't explain much but handed over a notebook. It contained the truth, but he asked them to take it to the Canadian police. Everything would be clear then. As he stood up to leave, a gunshot rang out. His wife followed him another shot. They were both killed. As the killer reached the door, Munza fired. Then, without thinking, he gave chase, but the crowd slowed him down, and he quickly lost sight of the attacker. Several Dutch civilians recognized Munza. Ellis, also spotted, grabbed the notebook but had nowhere to run. Soon, Munza was handed over to the Canadian police. Next to them stood the former German general. He had stayed in the Netherlands under the guise of post-war cooperation. He presented Munza's original death sentence. Although German law held little power in foreign lands, the Allied forces had no reason to stop Germans from executing their own. At a makeshift execution site, the guards lined up. Munza walked to his death. Meanwhile, Ellis was caged with other so-called traitors. To the Dutch, she had been a beloved performer for the Germans. They believed she had betrayed the resistance and wanted to punish her cruelly. Just as they were about to escalate their abuse, Hans arrived. Now honored as a resistance hero, Hans had become an officer. Thanks to him, Ellis was spared. She was cleaned up and returned her necklace and notebook. Hans looked through the notebook but said nothing. He took her back to his home. All the treasure the Nazis had looted was now his. Gold bars, jewelry, cash, even Ellis's old lighter. As Ellis reminisced, Hans told her that Munza had been executed. Ellis immediately began to convulse. From losing her family, becoming a spy, selling her body, to finding love with Munza, she had sacrificed everything. She had survived the war, but not its consequences. War had brought her only death and loss. As her body shook uncontrollably, Hans injected her with a sedative. But something felt wrong. In a daze, Ellis realized it was insulin. Hans intended to keep her asleep forever. Only then did she realize Hans was the real traitor. Believing it was over, Hans opened the window to enjoy the crowd's cheers. Ellis, using her last strength, found a British chocolate bar in his bag, the same kind dropped to the resistance. Once a luxury, it was now her antidote. Gradually recovering, Ellis staggered to the balcony. Without hesitation, she jumped. Hans screamed, begging the crowd to stop her. He had wanted to kill her because the notebook held proof of his treason, but Ellis escaped right under his nose. She found Gerben, blinded by grief. Gerben nearly attacked her, but faced with irrefutable evidence, he saw the truth. Hans, once a doctor, had been captured by the Nazis long ago. He had many Jewish patients. To save his own life, he traded their names for his freedom. Then the Nazis sent Van to lure and kill wealthy Jews. Hans joined the resistance only to exploit it. Gerben was horrified. They rushed to the warehouse and found Hans's jeep. The crates were empty. The hearse was gone. Hans was trying to escape. Using connections, Gerben learned the hearse's route. Soon, they intercepted it. Hans hiding in a coffin, never imagined it would become his grave. He frantically offered Ellis money for his life, but for someone who lost everything, no amount was enough. She stuffed the money back and began sealing the coffin with her necklace. After facing death so many times, Ellis no longer cared for wealth. Her family's death and months' execution had drained her. Gerben drove to a lake. The two of them sat beside it, waiting for Hans to stop moving. The stamp-collecting devil still had a sliver of conscience. The angel who celebrated victory had long lost their soul. Those who betrayed their country became heroes. Those who sold their souls were named traitors. In war, some are cut into pieces, others torn apart inside. The healer had greedy insulin. The killers offered sweet chocolate. Wars end, power doesn't. You may trust a person, but never trust human nature. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.